Hello and welcome to PropTechBuzz, the world's only platform that launches and promotes PropTech products and their leadership on the global stage. If you are a PropTech company and have not yet launched on PropTechBuzz.com, do consider doing it. We give you massive eyeballs in front of your prospective buyers. Talking about products and their leadership, I have one such leader in front of me, Kevin Shtofman, who is the global head of innovation at Cheere, a leading real estate data platform that connects and makes available all your real estate data for better investment, management, and underwriting decisions. With over 20 years of experience in the real estate, finance, and consulting industries, Kevin has a passion for leveraging data and technology to solve complex problems and create value for his clients and partners. At Cheere, he wears many hats and leads multiple initiatives to accelerate the ingestion, integration, validation, and consolidation of all types of real estate data. And during the course of the interview, we are going to dig deeper on what each of them mean. um, he has over three. I mean, his thanks to his hard work and collaboration, he has over 3 trillion AUM running through their platform, and they're looking always for newer ways to improve their products and services. So I'm thrilled to have with me Kevin. Kevin, welcome to PropTech Buzz. How are you doing today?
Thanks for having me on. All well. Preparing for the holiday season, I'm sure, like many of your viewers and listeners.
Yes, thank you for making this happen just before the holidays. I think it'll be great ending also to my podcast because I'm not having any more guests after you for this year. So I'm looking forward to this. So for the audience here, we are splitting this conversation into two parts. On the first part, we are going to learn a bit about how commercial real estate market is dealing with changing attitudes for living and working. That's the first part. We Kevin and I deliberated on a few topics, and I thought this will be a good one. And for the second segment, we'll go and understand the businesses that Cheere is into, the problem that is Cheere trying to solve in the industry. So we are splitting this into two. But before that, let's learn a little bit about Kevin. Kevin, why don't you tell us briefly about your career trajectory? What all you have been doing in your career all the way till today?
Sure. I've been in commercial real estate or in and around commercial real estate for 20 years. Started like many do in the financial services side of that world. I was an analyst, a research guy. I was at Morgan Stanley, did that for a little bit, and then got an MBA. For those who are old enough to remember the great financial crisis, 2008 to mid 2010, that I graduated from business school in May of 2010. So getting back into the world of investment banking and real estate was not a popular place to be. There were not a lot of opportunities there unless you had your own separate pool of capital. So I went into consulting and thought I was going to be there for a year. It ended up being 9 years that I spent across a variety of firms. And while I was in consulting, that's when I learned about the technology side of the business. All of our clients were commercial real estate clients, owners, operators, managers, investors, advisors. But technology use was new. They didn't really see the need to use a lot of workflow tech, data tech, accounting tech, because if you bought buildings in the right place at the right time, you made a lot of money. And that was very true up and until the mid 2010s, until the word PropTech became a thing. I think the first time I heard it was in 2014. So I was at Deloitte, and my job at the time was to evaluate all of the new PropTech companies that were launching in the industry. Clients were asking, there's so much of this out there. Which ones should we try? Which ones should we buy? Which ones should we use? And during that time there, I discovered a startup in the data visualization space. I loved it so much. I left the consulting world, became employee number 10 and their COO, grew that to about 50 employees, raised the Series A. We opened up our London office, formed a partnership with one client that was working with my now employer. And then eventually I moved over a little over a year ago to become the Chief Innovation Officer at Cheere. I've worked across all property types. I've worked across all geographic regions. And as you mentioned, now there's 3 trillion in our portfolio. So I've seen multiple business cycles in multiple places from multiple perspectives and views.
Excellent. I'll come to Cherry. But as I mentioned also in the intro, while we were deliberating on what is that one theme should we pick for this conversation, especially since you have a wide array of experience, yeah, one of the things you proposed a couple of topics, and one of the things that piqued my interest was how is commercial real estate market dealing with the changing attitudes for living and working. So let's delve deeper
Yeah,
into that. Do you want to shed some light there?
sure. I mean, when I started, I've born and raised in Dallas, did my undergraduate career down in Austin, but moved back to Dallas immediately after. And there was a neighborhood just north of downtown. They were calling it Uptown. It was brand new. It wasn't really a place you went a lot. And over a period of about 10 years, that neighborhood transitioned into far and away the most popular place for young professionals to live, work, and play. You had new office towers come up. You had mixed use development, which was not very common at the time. The idea that you would have retail on the bottom floor with multifamily apartments above and limited car use in and around the community, but all around it. Uh, that idea of walkability, that was fairly new, especially in a place like Dallas, which is so car centric. Uh, that proliferated throughout the US, basically in any NFL city. Most of our clients are large real estate owner operators and investors. And so I spend most of my time in what I like to call the NFL cities, which are the largest 32 cities in the country. Um, and up and until COVID, it was very common for people to commute long distances to office buildings that had a lot of amenities that you might need: childcare, health club, adequate parking, restaurants, food and beverage varieties, maybe even a movie theater or two, other entertainment options. So people didn't mind living far away and commuting in. Um, People also tolerated smaller residential footprints, smaller homes, smaller apartments, as long as they were near where they wanted to be. Those who had children lived further away with larger homes. That all changed when COVID hit. And the changes were happening earlier, right? People were spending less time going to retail stores to buy specific items. They used e-commerce more and more. The proliferation of industrial and logistics facilities that came up to handle a lot of that new e-commerce use became important. Retail real estate transitioned from a big place where you bought things to a destination where you went to experience things and maybe buy things from that store online to be delivered to your home. That transition was pretty vast and pretty swift, to the point where most department stores got failed, and it affected the wider shopping mall asset class, right? Fast forward to today, and now you have 2 very distinct buckets of real estate users, right? Everybody in the world knows real estate because we encounter it every day. We either work in a building, we live in a unit or a home, we shop places, we might vacation and stay at someone else's home or a hotel. We encounter and use real estate every day, but the way that we use it is very, very different. I don't know what the demographics are of your particular audience, but I don't mind a little bit of a commute now because I spent so much time at home during COVID. Like we were living and working and playing at home.
Got it.
And I think a bunch of people, they got stir crazy. And so for the first year, let's call it from mid 2020 through mid 2021, people liked the idea of not having to go to an office, right? They liked
Yes.
the idea of being with their family more, having some extra time for themselves, for leisure or upskilling, because you didn't have to commute. I think fast forward to today, and now there's two, like I said, two very distinct groups of people. The first group is people who are naturally extroverted. They are in sales roles,
Yeah.
they're in marketing roles, they're typically client facing or investor facing roles. They want to interact socially. They want to go to events. They want to go to an office and collaborate. We thrive on that sensory experience. Uh, and so those folks, I think, have been excited about return to office and the idea to go to places where there are lots of people interacting, whether that's for shopping or other leisure or work or otherwise. Then you have the second bucket of people who have often more technical roles: engineers, data scientists, accountants, or writers, right? Who don't like all of that sensory overload or can experience it for brief periods and then need to go recharge. They don't mind continuing to work from home. So the way that each of these two buckets of people interact with real estate is very different. And so owners, operators, developers, how they create building products need to be able to cater to both of these buckets of people.
Mm.
I can keep it, but that's the gist.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, excellent. And is the split fairly between 50-50 between the two, or are there more introverts in the world, or do you have a sense of that split?
I think it varies widely from region to region. Like I
Got
wouldn't
it.
say there are an equal number of extroverts, introverts in Midtown Manhattan versus Boise, Idaho, right? I think people with particular personality types and ambitions often gravitate toward different areas of the country. And then I'm giving U.S. examples because that's where I'm based, but
Yeah, of course.
we're a global platform, and most of the city centers, London, Singapore, Paris, uh, Munich, they're going to attract, people who are looking for new opportunity, who want to be mobile, who want to interact, who want new opportunity. Versus there are plenty of folks who would prefer to
Got it.
have better cost of living, maybe less government involvement in their lives, more freedom, maybe just less overall activity and more space. And they're often in tertiary markets.
Got it. So how has this knowledge of this split resulted in creating products for them? Like what have you seen lately? The design of the new products just to cater to these two buckets, as you
Yeah,
mentioned.
it definitely depends on the property type, but I can tell you most people that are going to go to areas where real estate is expensive, right? So larger urban areas with common newer stock of buildings. Um, the proximity to multiple types of amenities has changed, right? There are a lot of developers who maybe 20 years ago they built a building to attract people to just that building. Now most developers are thinking much more holistically about all of the destinations, landmarks, buildings that are around the building they are planning on developing. So
Got it.
if someone's going to build a hotel, they want to make sure the right food and beverage retail amenities are nearby, access to public transportation, or just good roads with good, policy around ride sharing.
Right.
They also want there to be some sort of attractions there that might drive tourist activity. They might want to see offices or a convention center nearby, because then that would drive business activity. So they're thinking a lot more holistically about
Mm.
where and what they build. Also, the amenity mix has changed, right? Amenities that value uh, the ability to socialize, but also the ability to step away and put on headphones and be digital. That's very different. Like every multifamily complex used to have a big pool and a grill, and like it was people were just going to go there and interact. Now you've seen there's more alcoves with a fire pit or other quiet areas with lounge chairs, so people can be in the moment but have their own space. You're seeing that differently. Um, the idea of health and wellness has become a much bigger deal in the last decade. So there's a lot more either gyms at complexes or
Mm.
access or membership to a health club facility nearby, as well as it won't be an on-site amenity, but there'll be a lot of developers that will, or employers too, that will provide telehealth memberships
Mm.
for people that are, they don't want to publicize that they're, having burnout issues or family issues or whatever, but they have an outlet to talk to somebody about that. That's a pretty big deal.
Nice.
Um,
I had Colleen, who's the founder of LulaFit. She's an amenity consultant and management. So she talked about how hospitality into commercial real estate is becoming a big new thing, just to bring people back to workplace, right? So the term hospitality was never associated with commercial. It was always associated with hotel industry, but not in workplaces, right? So that is one thing that she also highlighted. So I completely get what you're trying to say here.
yeah,
uh,
the reason that office assets were so popular with institutional investors is because they were predictable, right?
mm,
Tenants, which were other companies, they would come in and they would lease space for long periods of time, usually 10 years. There weren't tons of amenities in the building, but there were enough. And the landlord generally left the tenant alone. These were often triple net leases. And for those listeners who aren't familiar with the idea of a triple net lease, it's basically the tenant is responsible for all of the variable expenses that happen. The operating expenses of the building get passed through to the tenant. The electricity costs get passed off to the tenant. The base rent is very, very standard. So the cash flows are predictable. And the landlord and the tenant didn't really interact much other than answer work orders, like if the AC went out or if there were issues accessing parking or security. But like you mentioned, these days, you need things inside the building to attract people to come back in. So amenities become a lot more important. And the layout of the office space becomes a lot more important. Where it was cubicle farms or phone booths, pardon me, now it's a lot more collaboration space.
mm, true. Thank you. We shift gears here. As I mentioned early on, I'm very, very fascinated with Cherry. I didn't hear about Cherry 2 years ago, but after in the last 2 years, I've heard so much about Cherry that I always was fascinated to learn more about it. So before we begin into Cherry, why don't we understand your role? What is Cherry into? What is your role at Cherry? So I understand you are the chief innovation, global head of innovation. So maybe a little bit about your role there.
Sure. For those unfamiliar with Cheere, we're a data analytics platform. We've been around for 7 years now ish. Um, the platform itself went live early 2018, so the platform's been around for almost 6 years. Uh, and it became a global platform at the behest of our clients. We started as a US entity and grew globally. So I was hired a little over a year ago to help us expand our footprint globally. What that really means is growing through partnerships. So Cheere's platform is fantastic, but it relies on data from other systems. We are a data warehouse underneath the hood, and we are infrastructure for visualization, reporting, analysis, and artificial intelligence on top. So the platform is very limited in what it can do without the data that is fed into it from all of our partner systems, accounting systems, leasing tools, deal pipelines. And so my job is to evaluate, pardon me, all the potential partners that could exist regionally in Europe, in Asia, South America.
What kind of data sets are we talking about? And is there a parallel? So give me a scenario. I'm a commercial real estate a company, okay, and I have 5 different buildings. If I integrate Cherry into my facilities or into my system, what is it that Cherry will be able to accomplish?
So a pretty common client of Cheere's will be an enterprise grade owner, right? Multiple property types, multiple buildings. Gosh. So they'll store financial data in one system, cash flows, P&L, GL, trial balances, maybe budgets. Of course, this happens while recording, right? They're probably going to have a separate tool that stores information around leasing, marketing of spaces. They'll have a separate tool that handles their acquisitions pipeline. And they might have other tools that handle capital raising, investor relations, financial reporting, right? So across the investment life cycle, clients will have multiple tools where they store their own data, right? That I just mentioned, but they will also purchase third-party data. They might want sales and lease comps from around the area where they own and buy. They might want foot traffic information or demographic population movement. They might want permitting information. They might want to understand incentives for ESG investment, right? All of those data sets typically are structured differently. They don't talk to each other.
Right.
They don't adhere to a common entity name or property address or parcel. So basically, Cheere will ingest and integrate all of those data sources, whether they're first-party data, which is clients enter the data into their own system.
Right.
Their third-party data, which means clients purchase the data set from some sort of provider. Or their second-party data, which means they have legal access to the data, but they don't have direct control of it. An example of this would be you invest in a building with a JV partner, and the partner operates the building, so they're entering the data and they send it to you. Or you own the building, but you've hired a property manager to do all that work, and they're storing the data in their system. So it doesn't matter where the data sits, all of it goes into Cheere. We put it through our knowledge graph and standardize it to a particular parcel boundary, building address, ownership entity name, and any of the data that sits around it. When it was built, how big it is, who's inside, what it's worth, what taxes are owed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And as a client portfolio gets more complex, either by size, by scope, by property type mix, by fund mandate, by geographic region, the idea of utilizing Cheere makes more and more and more sense, because we help every department across the company access the data that they need to make decisions, regardless of whether they've been trained on whatever system's in use. The example I always like to give is there's someone on the let's say the head of leasing at the company. They need to know whether or not they need to hire more leasing professionals or engage with brokers before the buildings are acquired.
Correct.
It would be helpful for them to know which buildings are going in front of investment committee for potential acquisition.
Right.
But they don't want to learn the acquisition pipeline tool. That's another tool that require a bunch of time to upskill on. But
True.
if they just had all the data around the pipeline and what was close, accessible to them, they would have a lot more value. Right? And having all that data connected, that is what Cheere does.
Got it. My next question is going to be very popular once I share this. So let me first share my screen, because I think Cheere was involved in this market map. You mentioned about Cheere, and then there are a host of other data and analytics providers. Lots of it. It's a crowded place there, and I wanted to take your expertise to try to unearth or understand this landscape, right? And where does Cheere fit in? What are the other kinds of data and analytics? So this is, I think, this came from Vertical Tech, and Cheere was a partner in creating this. Maybe could you summarize the landscape? Could you help us demystify the landscape of real estate data players here?
Of course. So I think of this as there's 4 different types of companies that interact with buildings. You've got the owners, investors, you've got the operators, managers, you've got occupiers, which are the tenants, and then you've got advisors, which would be brokers, architects, attorneys. And then amongst those 4 company types, you've got the food groups, the property types: office, industrial, multifamily, and retail. And then inside of these companies at these properties, you've got 2 different roles. You have the people that source deals or capital, and then you have the people that manage deals or capital. Right? So depending on where you sit in that matrix, if you're a asset manager for an office provider, right, you're going to have very different data needs than if you are the head of acquisitions for a logistics provider. So we've tried to divide up all of the data in the space into buckets that are used for purposes of people doing jobs in real estate. So if your responsibility is to find the next great deal for your portfolio, you're going to want a lot of information around the market in what I would call intel, around property level information and market level information. That's going to be the top right box, commercial property intelligence. That's going to look like comparables, demographics information, the movement of people and goods, interesting things that are happening in legislation. You're also going to want to know information about the demographics and different companies in the market that you are trying to buy in. So that company employment and demographic bucket, which is near top left. The more you know about the specific companies that are headquartered in the area, if they're hiring, if they're firing, if they're growing or shrinking, if they've raised capital, if they've had issues with fines, right? That's going to be super important. So those 2 buckets of data are really important to people that go and find the deals. It's very different from people who manage the buildings once they're purchased, right? Then it shifts to making sure you're leasing to the right tenants at the right terms, making sure that your marketing campaigns are leading to interest in your building. That's the dead center box in the screen, right? And then once the spaces are leased up, or maybe even before, people are going to ask about characteristics of the building. Is it sustainable? Is it how new is it? A lot of that ESG type information that's going to be inside the building. That's going to be left side box. Right? And then as you're managing the building, and then maybe you go to try to sell the building, that new acquirer, before they buy the building, they're going to want to underwrite for potential risks that there might be inside of that building. So they're going to know about climate risk, permitting risk, and zoning risk. Anything happening underneath the ground they don't know about. That's going to be your bottom left box in risk hazard. Right. So how you interact with the building, whether you're trying to find new ones to buy, or your job is to help manage the buildings, or your job is to provide advice to tenants on where they should lease space, you're going to have very different data and system and workflow needs. But
Right.
if you zoom out a little bit, regardless of which data sets you pick, you need to
Mm,
make sure that all of that data is centralized, standardized, and accessible to the right people. And that's where the infrastructure comes in on the bottom. So you have a bunch of very, very widely well-known data warehouse companies from
yeah.
the largest cloud players.
Yeah.
Uh, and Cheere is fortunate to be partners with most of them, and we integrate with all of them. So clients
Mm,
will have needs that say, I'm using Snowflake, I'm using Google Cloud, I'm using Microsoft Azure, I'm using AWS. No problem. We integrate directly in and out with those data warehouses, which is why our logo is down there, because we have a data warehouse. If the client needs one and doesn't want to contract with the others, we prefer that they contract with one of these cloud providers and integrate with our platform. So once you have all of the data that's from these middle boxes
mm,
ingested and integrated into your infrastructure, then we scroll up to the top, because now you have a lot of ideas and
mm,
capabilities of what you can do with that combined data. You,
mm.
you can, on the top left side of the screen, you can build modeling and analysis tools with the data. You can do scenario analysis, Monte Carlo simulations, forecasting. You can put some AI models and tests on top to understand which markets you might want to go to next, which tenants you might want to avoid leasing to, et cetera. And once those models are built, you need a way to visualize that information to your
Right.
internal executives, to limited partner investors, to regulators. And as you can see, there's no shortage of BI and visual tools in the marketplace. And
Right.
what Cheere likes to do is partner with a lot of these BI tools. So we will integrate, ingest, and model all the data. And then we'll send
Mm.
it to these visual providers who have done a wonderful job at data storytelling. And they'll take our trusted data model and then build the visuals on top that the clients can use.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for demystifying this. It's like it looks like a maze for me, and thank you for for simplifying this. I got this map I think a couple of months ago, and then I always wanted to talk about this with somebody. But thanks for doing that.
We've
Uh,
already gotten a lot of constructive feedback from companies who felt like they were left off the list unfairly. So a lot of folks have been chiming in to make the case why they should be included. And we're always excited about new data providers, new applications that are finding product market fit that should be included on this map. So the plan is to actually have this map updated every quarter.
Excellent.
As you can imagine, some companies fall in and out of favor. Some
Yeah.
companies will merge and combine with others. So we
Yeah.
want this to be a living and breathing document.
Excellent. Yeah. That'll be doing a great big favor to the community out there. Um, since this is also a business podcast, our listeners are often interested in learning about the growth story in the last 8 years of. I mean, I know you have been in the organization for the past year and a half only, but would you be able to shed some light on what are the strategies that have worked for Cheere for growth and scale? Is it through partnerships? Is it through promotions? Maybe if you can shed some light there, that'd be
Sure.
helpful.
I met Cheere's co-founders back in 2018 when the
Right.
platform actually launched, and their strategy was quite different
Right.
than it is today. When I first met them, they wanted to the vision was to be basically the Bloomberg of real estate. Uh,
Hmm.
for those, I mean, obviously most people know the name Bloomberg, but the idea is that it has a bunch of data and intelligence gathering mechanisms for the financial services world, all
Right.
accessible in a single platform. The difference being people buy specific terminals for that data, whereas
Right.
we are a cloud-based platform accessible by anybody who wants to get a subscription. Uh,
Right.
but the initial idea was that every financial asset has a unique identifier that helps it be traded in the open market. It's called a QSIP. That's how stocks and bonds and other managed futures are traded. Real estate didn't have that. So
Right.
Cheere's vision was to bring together a bunch of sources of public and private data to create that QSIP for a building so that other companies could leverage that data.
Right.
And the initial Cheere clients were actually other PropTech companies. I'm
Hmm.
not sure which of them I'm allowed to mention, but um, most companies that serve the commercial real estate industry that are large and well funded actually are not just partners of Cheere, they're clients. They leverage our foundation data set
Hmm.
and some of our infrastructure in order to help their platforms be more powerful. That
Got it.
was that was step one. Then over time, the landlords, the owners, the operators began to leverage Cheere's platform to use all of that data plus
Hmm.
integrate their own internal data.
Hmm.
And for since the beginning, Cheere has been what I like to call Switzerland. We do not anonymize data from clients and monetize it. We don't sell data that clients own. Clients' data remain clients' data.
Got it.
That was a requirement from our largest landlord and developer clients. I'm talking like massive, multiple tens of billions companies like Brookfield, Starwood Capital, Nuveen, Howard Hughes, etc. We have 170 clients, I think. Um, but what got us to here is not what's going to help us globally scale. That will
Hmm.
all be done through partnerships. So
Got it.
we have I can't give all the details yet. It won't be launched until our data summit in May, but
Sure.
a brand new partnership program that's built by tiers, almost like a you'd see in Microsoft or Google certification program.
Right.
Uh, Certain partners will have more benefits and tiers by providing better terms to our clients on how they sell data or access to their application or channel partners that help deploy our platform globally. We think that is what's going to help us grow. We want to be the infrastructure that's used by every company that interacts with the built world, whether you develop, whether you own and operate, whether you manage, whether you advise. It doesn't really matter. We want you to use Cheere as your infrastructure to receive and standardize all of your data.
Excellent.
Is
You
your
you
choice as the client. Right? We yeah.
got it. Finish your thought.
We think that all of the unsexy stuff that happens behind the scenes to get information to a format that it's usable, um, it's very, very hard to do, but most end users don't see the value of that work. They want the value in answering the questions: where should I buy next? Who should I
Yeah.
lease to? How do I identify risk in my portfolio early and avoid it? Uh, all of that stuff that can happen inside of a client's proprietary model or proprietary visuals that they use that they can build themselves or use consultants to build that we're partnered with. But before you can do any of that, you need clean, centralized, standardized, trusted data. And that's where we want to be. We want to be in the trusted data world. And what happens after that? We want to unlock that ability for clients to retain their competitive advantage.
Excellent. And since you mentioned about this real estate data landscape evolving over time, and since you are living at the cutting edge of bleeding edge of this evolution, where do you see this entire space evolving in the coming years? Do you see some disruptions going to happen, some transformations going to happen? Do you want to give a sense of what's going to happen in the coming years?
So I really think that more and more companies that did not buy data before because it was too expensive. I'm thinking
Mm,
a new fund that just launched for $50 million, or the mom and pop operator that started renting out Airbnbs and now they have 15 units. And they're
mm,
thinking, oh gosh, this is this is a real business now. What do I do to manage it? Um, there's going to be data that's more and more affordable for those folks to access. Um, I think the type of information that they're going to care about is going to be more around supply. So, as you have no doubt, you've probably interviewed people on your podcast before that have, bemoaned the undersupply of housing that we have in basically every area of the world. Um, and that happens for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved with, there's zoning issues, there's what we call NIMBYism, not in my backyard. People don't want to scale up the number of units available in a particular neighborhood because they want their privacy. But that's changing. And so understanding what building activity is happening in a certain neighborhood or submarket is going to be more and more important. And we have partnerships with 3 of those permitting data providers. We think they're going to see a lot of activity. I think another area that's going to get really interesting is what penalties and incentives are being offered to adhere to certain ESG standards in certain markets, right? So any information about building incentives, we have one partner that provides that data. Legislative penalties, we have 2 companies that collate that data. That's all going to become more and more interesting. I don't know how many of your listeners are aware, but 2024 is going to be the most active election cycle I definitely know in my lifetime. I'm 42 years old. Countries that will hold presidential or prime minister level elections next year, starting with Taiwan in January all the way through to the United States in November, represent over 50% of global GDP. That means that 50% of the world's output will have elections next year that could change that country's leader. And typically, a change in leadership results in changing legislation, and changing legislation results in changing penalties and incentives for people who are owning and operating and producing new real estate. So it's always important to pay attention to how those cycles affect where people are going to be incentivized to live, work, and play.
Excellent. Well, this brings us to the end of our fascinating conversations with Kevin. Kevin, thank you for your time and sharing with your wealth of wisdom to us. And anybody who listened through this entire conversation, you would realize that Kevin is undoubtedly the guru of data and analytics, and his experience comes through. So, Kevin, thank you for your time and sharing all of this wisdom with us.
Of course, enjoyed being on.
See you around, Kevin. Bye bye.